would you rank every single quarterback from the last 3 draft classes if they were all thrown together in one singular draft? That is our mission today here on the Fantasy Life Show, and also some tight ends as well at the end of things. So joining me as always, we have Dwain the Rock McFarland. And Dwain, let's get right into it with the man at the top, number one, and honestly in a tier of his own, Mr. Jayden Daniels. How quickly things can change, because this time last year, Caleb Williams was pretty much the unanimous QB1 of the draft class, but now it is Daniels sitting alone again, not just number one in this class, but also overall. So Dwain, overall thoughts again on what has made Daniels the clear-cut QB1.
Yeah, I mean, and we were actually on it last year as far as like redraft. We were taking Jayden Daniels ahead of Caleb Williams. But to your point, like if you were doing like a dynasty startup kind of draft or just a straight up rookie draft for dynasty, a lot of folks were leaning to Caleb Williams. But man, when you look at what Jayden Daniels did on the ground, Ian, it's just really hard to argue with. 891 rushing yards for this guy, 6 rushing touchdowns. And he also showed a lot of promise as a passer. I know he didn't come through huge in the yardage, but 3,568 yards in 17 games, and we know that he was playing injured for at least 4 or 5 of those where he was just kind of gutting it out. So when you look at the ceiling for what you could get with a guy like Jayden Daniels, I mean, how high do you think it is? Like I think the guy could clearly throw for over 4,000 yards. He could rush for 1,000. That makes him one of like 3 guys we can even say that about. Like really, Lamar Jackson like is the closest comp right now for Jayden Daniels for the ceiling.
That's it. It's the freaking MVP himself, the man responsible for the most prolific fantasy season ever. That is really the ceiling with Jayden Daniels. And why not, man? Just the 4th rookie quarterback ever to average at least 20 fantasy points per game in year 1, joining Cam Newton, RG3, and Justin Herbert as well. So again, incredible rookie year. And the crazy part is, Dwain, I mean, just based on what we've seen Washington do this offseason, it should get better. We're bringing Dan Quinn back. We're bringing Cliff Kingsbury back. We got Deebo Samuel added to the wide receiver room. PFF's 10th-ranked offensive line returns 4 or 5 starters and seemingly upgraded by bringing in Laramie Tunsil. So in our ranks just for 2025, it still is Lamar and Josh Allen and Jayden Daniels. But man, Dwain, some of the early drafts they're all going in the same round. And honestly, man, for good reason.
Yeah, I mean, it's honestly whichever one of those, if you're thinking redraft, whichever one comes off the board last, like I'm very willing to take them. They also sit in a pocket, like in drafts for 2025, where you start to run into a lot of uncertainty around the other positions, the wide receivers, the running backs, and different players that you're looking at those positions. And I do think when we look at this year, we don't have a Jayden Daniels per se that we can be taking in rounds 9 or 10. Last year, he was a major part of our draft strategy at Fantasy Life. You and I both talked about him being a major target, and he was the potential cheat code of getting you out of spending an early round draft pick on a quarterback and being able to fall back on Jayden Daniels. We don't necessarily have a guy like Daniels this year, so that makes it a strategy where we really can consider taking one of these quarterbacks, these true dual threat. There's really only 4 of them that fit all the criteria that we want, and Jayden Daniels definitely being one of those. But yes, as far as like looking at the last 3 draft classes, you're starting your dynasty team today. I think Jayden Daniels is very clearly the number one. Easy. You can almost say he's 2 or 3 tiers above everyone else standing in a spot of his own.
Mentioned, though, again, Daniels was selected number 2 in the actual 2024 NFL draft behind Mr. Caleb Williams, who had a relatively disappointing rookie season, okay? Similar sentiment to Marvin Harrison Jr., who we discussed yesterday, where a lot of it had to do with the sky-high expectations. But the problem is, Dwain, those expectations really haven't gone anywhere for Caleb. However, we are now expecting a jump because, man, you talk about another great offseason from Chicago. You add Ben Johnson, everyone's favorite, schematic mind on offense as head coach. You spruce up the offensive line, which was, again, the primary culprit in most people's minds for Williams' lackluster rookie campaign. And yes, we lost Keenan Allen, but you can argue that getting Luther Burden in round 2 and Colston Loveland in round 1 actually gives the Bears overall, wide receiver and tight end room a higher ceiling than last year. So everything's going great, Dwain, but my God, we're not exactly getting a discount on the guy in Fantasyland.
Yeah, I mean, Caleb, if we were to name a guy this year that's going in like rounds 8 and 9 of your fantasy draft where he could be the guy if you're having to wait, I do think he's one of these players that gives us the most upside, but there's massive questions here. If we look at quarterbacks taken in the top 3 picks going back to 2010, Ian, here's where Caleb Williams ranked in these categories. Passing yards per game, 17th of 20 with 208. Yards per attempt, 14th at 6.3. Completion percentage, he was actually 8th at 63%. Passing touchdowns per game, he was 12th at 1.18. Interceptions per game, this was actually pretty impressive. Only 0.4 per game. That was the third best. Passer rating, 87.8. So really, it's those passing yards per game and the yards per attempt numbers that we need to get up. You just talked about all the different things that the Bears have done, including adding Ben Johnson, all the weapons around him. So really the hope is that he can take that next step. And what's interesting about Caleb Williams, if you go back and you watch him from last year, Ian, I know you've put some stuff out on Caleb, like he makes the big throws that wow us. He makes the plays that amaze us. He makes the plays where we're like, oh my God, like maybe he could be like a Josh Allen. The real problem for Caleb was he couldn't make the easy plays last year. I don't know that it's that he couldn't. He wasn't willing to. He was always looking for the big play. That got the offense off schedule. That puts you in third down and long. Then you know what's coming, Ian. You're going to be facing the blitz. You're going to be getting an extra pressure. You're going to invite these defensive coordinators to really use these schemes that are going to be more confusing to you because they're playing with a lead. So just a lot of things that I think piled up against Caleb. So I think that's the big thing. Will he take some of these easy passes on first down, second down to keep things manageable? But here's the thing I do love about Caleb Williams the most this year, and I think it's one of the things that make him someone where we really should consider him in the top 12 fantasy quarterbacks. I've got him right now as my QB9 in the Fantasy Life ranks. I think you're right there with me. But the biggest thing is this. He had 81 rushing attempts last year. If we go back to 2011, the quarterbacks that ran for 70 to 90 rushing attempts in a season, they averaged 3.6 rushing touchdowns per season. We didn't have any rushing touchdowns for Caleb last year. So if he just gets to 3, I know people are like, oh, great, 18 points. Still, guys, whenever you get that and you add that on to what he's already doing and the fact that the guy actually ran for quite a few yards, 489 yards last year, now you kind of have a path, you have a path to ceiling in 2 different areas, right? This is a guy that he could surprise us and run for 600 yards and 5 or 6 scores. We just talked about all the weapons. We talked about his ceiling as a passer. He suddenly throws for 4,200 yards and 30 touchdowns, and you get 600 rushing yards and 4 or 5 rushing touchdowns with that. That's going to put Caleb immediately into the conversation to be a top 3 or 4 fantasy football quarterback pretty much in any season around. And he's one of the few guys that has the skill set where he can reach those sort of levels in each category. When we look at him with our variance logic, which is something cool you guys will see in all of our tools. They'll be coming soon. It is one where Caleb grades out really good, Ian. So while he's not quite like the Jayden Daniels where we know we're going to get 800-900 rushing yards, I do think the unique ceiling that he gives you in 2 different aspects as far as a passer and as a rusher, even though it's not to the level of Jayden, makes him a very, very interesting prospect once you get past like the top 6 or 7 guys in your fantasy draft.
You mentioned the mobility. I mean, yeah, the man took 68 sacks last season, but you look at how many sacks he avoided along the way, actually probably could have been even worse. I understand a lot of those were, Williams' fault, but hey, we do have our friends over at PFF actually assigning responsibility for, yes, who was actually at fault for the sack, and even removing the ones that they deemed to be Caleb's fault. Bears still did allow the most sacks in the league. I believe it was 37 charged to that offensive front. So again, hopefully Williams not feeling that same sort of urgency to kind of make up for a season's worth of disappointment of one play. I thought there were, similar plays on film during his last year at USC. Hopefully, again, better overall offensive environment won't take away from that. So my one question with Caleb, again, looking more so at 2025 now as opposed to just super far into the future. You have him QB9, I have him QB11. That's actually higher than Waz and Freeman, who are at QB12 and 15. But I just find myself looking at this QB class, and at the top, okay, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jayden Daniels, even Jalen Hurts has actually been sliding a round or 2 past. Like, if I'm going to be using a high-end pick on a quarterback, I want it to be on that sort of alien who can just break the league with their rushing and passing upside. You mentioned, Caleb does have some good rushing upside, but we're not going to get 800 yards or 10 touchdowns or anything like that as opposed to top guys. So why reach on Caleb Williams, who we're hoping we can put it together as a top 8 quarterback when we have guys who literally have already finished as top 8 quarterbacks like Bo Nix, Justin Fields, Brock Purdy, Jared Goff, Justin Herbert, Dak Prescott, Jordan Love. All of them have done already what we're hoping Caleb can do, and they're all going cheaper in fantasy drafts right now. So thoughts on maybe deploying more of a first or last strategy this year because, again, not getting too much of a discount on Caleb despite the disappointing rookie year.
Yeah, I think my issue with that is a lot of those guys you just named, I don't think have near the rushing ceiling as Caleb. I think he could rush for 500 to 600 yards, which is not Jayden Daniels. But if he does that and he throws for 4,500 yards, which those other guys you named can do, those are all guys that they have very similar range of outcomes and what could happen from a passing ceiling standpoint. But Caleb does stand ahead of most of those guys. Now, one that we're about to talk about that you just named, which is Bo Nix, they're very similar, right? We've got two very similar archetypes here as far as what could happen between Mr. Nix as well as Caleb. But outside of that, once we get to Trevor Lawrence, like Caleb, even though we like what Trevor Lawrence can do as a rusher, Caleb's still a step ahead of that. You look at Dak Prescott, he's starting to come down. So I like the other players. Kyler Murray's the other one that's right there with him. But again, I want to bet a little bit more on Caleb's potential ceiling. I feel like at this point, Ian, like we could get a spike passing season from Kyler, but it would just be kind of a lucky spike, which we've already seen one of those in his career. What I'm betting on with Caleb is that he really was worth being the first pick overall, and he's got that every single year. He could be this 4,500, passing yard kind of guy. So it's not an exact science. I do think he has enough upside in the two different categories to keep him ahead of those guys. Having said all of that, like he's not a guy where I want to start reaching for him. I want him to kind of go in the range. I put him at QB9, and that's about where I'd be willing to take him. But I don't want it to be a situation where Caleb suddenly starts climbing into round 5 or 6 of fantasy drafts. That would definitely scare me away from him. But if he stays where he's at right now, he is a guy that I want to be targeting whenever I can.
Look, I do just feel, and you're spot on, I'm fine with them around that QB9, QB10 spot as well. But this just seems to me, Dwain, like the kind of player we're going to hear about in August from some of the more casual fantasy football analysts, if you will. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but everyone's going to be like, hey, I'm starting to think, guys, this late round quarterback, Caleb Williams, have a nice bounce back year. And it's like, no, man, he's actually still going as a top 10 quarterback in draft.
He's already steamed up.
He's already up there. So we mentioned, though, again, Caleb really being neck and neck with Bo Nix in our rankings and certainly in this tier list as well. Again, re-ranking basically the quarterbacks from the last 3 draft classes. Jayden Daniels up top, number 1 spot in his own tier. After that, Caleb Williams and, yes, Bo Nix, who quietly, man, just put together the 5th best rookie season ever in terms of fantasy points per game, even beat out what C.J. Stroud managed to do 2 years ago. So accordingly, he is a consensus top 10 QB from our group of rankers. And look, I don't think he's had the same sort of, off-season just boom that Caleb's had, but he really hasn't needed it, man. We have PFF's number 2 ranked offensive line returning all 5 starters. Sean Payton's back in town. Would have been cooler to get some better upgrades in the wide receiver room, but Evan Ingram, RJ Harvey, feeling a little bit better about the tight ends and running backs. I mean, who's to say right now that Bo Nix couldn't actually be the guy who makes that leap from more of a mid-range QB1 right there into the top 5?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could make the argument that, Bo Nix belongs ahead of Caleb Williams. I think we're just thinking raw tools wise. When we look at it, we see there is this theoretical ceiling that could be higher for Caleb Williams. Bo Nix living in this, scheme with Sean Payton where he is checking it down more, not pushing the ball down the field as much. But if you guys watch the end of the season, man, Bo Nix was throwing some absolute dimes on deep crossing routes to guys like Marvin Mims, hitting these big touchdown plays, had another one down the sideline. So Nix was showing capabilities of being able to actually throw that ball deep later in the season. So I think that's the big question that a lot of people have around him was, is it just this schemed up quarterback? But at the same time, Ian, people had questions like that around Drew Brees for years and years and years. And what did Drew Brees just continue to do? He continued to compile, top 5, top 6 fantasy finishes. And with Bo Nix, we actually have a player that can run the ball. Didn't do quite as well as Caleb Williams on the ground last year, but I would say same tier, right? We're talking about a guy that could run for 400 to 600 yards, depending on how good his luck runs, can add several rushing touchdowns on the ground as well. So, yeah, I think that there's a scenario here where with Bo Nix, we're looking at another top 6 fantasy finish for the guy. So I'm with you. Wish there would have been a few more upgrades, in the offseason, but it is a coordinator in Sean Payton where we know that he does scheme and get more out of a lot of these players that maybe you and I don't think are necessarily that great, but he does find a way to get something out of them. And it was a breakout year for Cortland Sutton last season. So when you look at Bo Nix, I still have him right below Caleb Williams, but I do think you can make the argument that they are exactly equal, or even that you wanted to put Bo Nix ahead of Caleb Williams.
I mean, Bo Nix really was what you kind of got, what you talked about, hoping to get with Caleb Dwain, those rushing touchdowns. I mean, Bo last year ran for 430 yards and had the 4 rushing scores. Meanwhile, Caleb was stuck at 489 yards and 0 scores. And accordingly, I mean, this is the company that Bo was keeping just in terms of fantasy points from rushing production. The only guys with more: Jalen Hurts, Jayden Daniels, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, and Anthony Richardson. So again, when we can just get that extra 4 or 5 points a game from rushing, really does go a long way and help separate guys like Bo Nix and obviously Caleb Williams potentially from the Jared Goffs, Tua Tagovailoa, Matthew Stafford's pocket passers of the world. So again, certainly feeling good about Bo Nix moving forward, but we already saw what he did last season. I think, Dwayne, the really big question comes down to the third quarterback in tier 2, Mr. C.J. Stroud, who I am just going to keep repeating this all year long, finished as the QB 28 in fantasy points per game, everyone. And I even went back through, because we see this sometimes where, the T. Higgins effect, basically. They go out there, they play 5 snaps, they're emergency only, and this gets put into their points per game and ends up kind of being the skewed stat. Even taken away week 18 when they play 1 drive, he threw a quick touchdown, they got him out of the game. Sadly, guys, that was not his lowest scoring game of the year. That Packers debacle was. But all right, take away week 18, we only played 1 drive. We're only getting up to QB 25, man. That's basically where Kirk Cousins and Daniel Jones were finishing. So on the one hand, the Texans have done a lot to change the personnel, okay? Laramie Tunsil's out. We added Cam Robinson. They traded for Ed Ingram and signed Trent Brown and Laken Tomlinson on the offensive line. Actually, just Laken Tomlinson, excuse me. But the thing is, if you want to take PFF grades for what they're worth, I mean, none of these guys were actually good playing offensive line last year, at least in terms of PFF grades. If you listening out there happen to be an offensive line aficionado and want to correct me, would love to hear it in the comments, all right? Now, a wide receiver, Nico Collins, absolute dog. I hope we get 17 full games out of him and he's able to do everything there, but we're losing Stephon Diggs. Tank Dell's not expecting to play. Added a couple Iowa State Cyclones and Jayden Higgins and Jalen Noel. That's cool. Added Christian Kirk. I'm not convinced that's necessarily an upgrade over what we were entering week 1 with last year, Dwayne. So again, we saw the ceiling with C.J. Stroud as a rookie. I still think he's a really good quarterback, but man, we saw this environment drag him down last year. Are we so sure it's going to be able to lift him up all of a sudden in 2025?
Yeah, and even the ceiling as a rookie was 19.1 fantasy points per game, or 18.7. So it's not like it was like this astronomical number. And the challenge that you have with CJ Stroud is he's not going to give you that opportunity to run for 500 yards like what we just talked about with Caleb Williams as well as Bo Nix. And so you could make an argument, in my opinion, that CJ Stroud should be bumping down a tier from where we have him. But he did have that really good season as a passer in year 1. The challenge is it's such a narrow needle to try to thread to get a huge fantasy year out of a pure pocket passer. Does it happen? Absolutely. You get guys like Joe Burrow. They're in a pass-first offense. They completely own the way their offense works, and you're surrounded by Jamar Chase plus T. Higgins. They stay healthy. You get this massive upside, even with just a pure pocket passer. But that's what you're aiming for with CJ Stroud. And the challenge is when you go back, especially, Ian, over the last 3 to 4 years with how the NFL is changing, they're not allowing these massive passing performances anymore. I think it makes it more of a challenge to think that CJ Stroud can hold his ground. Now, I gave him this tier because he actually has had that good season. Caleb Williams, we have in the tier, and he hadn't even had a good year yet. So he's still much more of a projection than CJ Stroud, but we just like the potential with the rushing for Caleb Williams. So I wouldn't blame anyone, though, if they wanted to make an argument saying, hey, man, this might be a tier 2 high for CJ Stroud, and he should actually go in the tier below because he is going to have to do it primarily with his arm. I'm with you. I mean, fine. I like the Christian Kirk signing, like, Stephon Diggs getting hurt. You mentioned that. Like Christian Kirk, and Stephon Diggs at the age he's at, like they're pretty close. Like I'd still probably slightly lean to Stephon Diggs. I think the big key here is what can Jayden Higgins do, Ian? If Jayden Higgins can live to the top end of his comp group, he's a guy that we talked about on the wide receiver episode. Guys can go back and check that out over on YouTube. He is a guy that we had as one of the top comps was actually Nico Collins. Another one was George Pickens. So if he hits the top end of his range and we have a healthy Nico Collins, that would be big for CJ Stroud because then he's suddenly sitting in a bucket where he's more like Joe Burrow and he's got these 2 really good weapons that he can throw to. Right now, he's really only got 1 alpha with Nico Collins and he's got these complementary players around him. So the trajectory of Jayden Higgins, or maybe even Jalen Noel's the other guy you want to bring up, if one of them can hit big, that would be big for a pure, I don't want to say pure pocket passer, but near pure pocket passer like what we have with CJ Stroud.
Thoughts on the Bobby Slowick subtraction? Because, when I'm going over on the old Twitter sphere and discussing with everyone what exactly went wrong here with Stroud, a lot of people were just saying, yeah, man, that's Bobby for you. But this time last year, Bobby Slowick was considered one of the hottest, young OC candidates and everything. So I know a lot of 1st and 10, 2nd and 8 runs to Joe Mixon up the middle. I don't love that. But again, it's one of these things where I just feel like we're assuming that, oh my God, it can't get any worse than that. And looking at their new offensive coordinator, Nick Caley, maybe he is the next big thing. But this dude, can we really say Sean McVay's disciple when he spent 2015 to 2022 at the Patriots? Man, all right, he was there coaching the tight ends for the Rams in 2023, passing game coordinator in 2024. How much say he exactly had in that passing game over McVay and Matthew Stafford? I kind of doubt it was much. So again, this is a guy that coached tight ends and fullbacks basically for 7-8 years and then finally got to moonlight under McVay and Stafford. Maybe it works out. Maybe he's the spark they need. I read that, they're basically saying he's bringing a lot of energy to the room. Maybe they just needed more energy in the room, Dwain. But again, thoughts on maybe the Slowick factor that led to CJ Stroud's aforementioned dismal 2024.
Yeah, I think anything's possible, and it's hard to argue with how bad Slowick was last season. But at the same time, I just had a projection summit with Mr. Matthew Friedman. We got together last Friday. We both worked on our projections separately. We came together. We had some barbecue, Ian. We drank some beers, some cold Bud Lights, and we talked about where we are with all these teams. And we got to this team, and one of the things we talked about is can we actually give them any sort of upgrade for what we know about this offensive coordinator? And our answer was no. We hope it's better than Bobby Slowick, but we really don't know. He's got a diverse background. Yes, he's been with some teams that we like what they've done, but does that guarantee that he's going to be able to actually implement that, for the Texans? I think that's a major question mark, and it's something that we'll just have to keep an eye on early in the year, at least for now, just hoping that it's an upgrade just by the subtraction of Bobby Slowick. But again, like you said, people thought Slowick was this really good coordinator at this time last year. In fact, the man turned down opportunities to go be a head coach. It's not just us. Actual other NFL owners wanted to hire Bobby Slowick as their head coach. So it is kind of funny that suddenly now he is the butt of the jokes and he is the guy that just kind of got left out to dry.
And again, clearly that was a mistake, anyone that was offering a head coaching job. But I just have a hard time believing this guy was literally considered a top 5, top 10, young rising offensive coordinator. And he was really one of the worst in the league. All right. Like most things, probably somewhere in between. So again, just takes quite a bit of leap of faith to assume that's going to be a massive upgrade merely by subtracting him. But all that said, Dwain, if these things do go the way, what do you think about the Texans as kind of dark horse contender, man? I mean, they went into Arrowhead last year, had one of those ridiculous stats where they were one of the only teams to lose while limiting their opposition to that few yards and everything. Offensive line fell apart, but you look at that defense, man. Will Anderson, Daniil Hunter, Derek Stingley, they added CJ Gardner-Johnson. That defense could legit be a top 5 unit in the league, and God forbid the offense gets back to cooking. Texans, Super Bowl futures. I don't know how we got here in the conversation. A lot of negatives being thrown around, but yeah.
Last year, they were my pivot from the Cowboys. I even gave my brother a Texans hat. Thank you, New Era. You guys sent me 2, so I kept one for myself to wear on the shows, and I gave my brother the other one. And we were kind of this is just in case the Cowboys suck. We know that we can root for the Texans, and then things went sideways for them as well. So, but I do think you bring up some good points. I mean, if they can keep the receiver crew healthy and they can continue and they can make some upgrades on the offensive scheme, and then you look at what they have on defense, yeah, I think that the Texans are one of these teams that they've got enough elements. Obviously, the offensive line is the other big question where they are hoping that it is addition by subtraction. And you already did a great job of kind of highlighting those guys weren't that good last year anyway. So hopefully we've got a better group this year.
Post-hype bounce back, you never know. But hey, as Dwain mentioned, one good way to really wrap your mind around these teams is to refresh with a delicious Bud Light. So why not hear a little bit more from them?
Check out the new whip.
Tight.
Fully custom.
How many Bud Lights can you fit in that puppy?
As many Bud Lights as it takes.
It's a lot of Bud Lights. You have to give me one of those.
Continuing to break down the top QBs from the last 3 draft classes, we led things off with Jayden Daniels. Tier 2 consisted of Caleb Williams, Bo Nix, and CJ Stroud. Tier 3, Dwain, is where things start to get pretty spicy because we are headlined by Mr. Drake May, who, don't look now, man, averaged more fantasy points per game last year than Caleb Williams, averaged more than CJ Stroud managed, of course, who didn't last season, and honestly has that rushing upside that we look for in a passer. I wouldn't say the Patriots have necessarily had as good of an offseason as the Bears, adding Mike Vrabel, very good for real life. We like the defense, but maybe not necessarily expecting to see, the greatest show on turf out here, airing it out in New England. But thoughts on Drake May and the potential for him to maybe leap up a tier or two by this time next year?
Yeah, I mean, Drake May, honestly, I think you could have made an argument for him being in the last tier that we just talked about, right? Because he did show promise last season. He's got that thing that we love, which you talked about, his ability to run around and make some things happen with his legs, Ian. And if you look at what I did with him in the projections, I've got him projected for 208 yards, but the ceiling on that would be 231 passing yards per game. I've got him projected for 1.4 passing touchdowns. If he hit his ceiling on that, it would be 1.72. But the big thing is the rushing yards. I've got him projected for 33.7 rushing yards per game, which is actually slightly less than what he already did last year. But if he hit his ceiling on that, it would be more around 45 yards per game. And so when you start to add all this up, again, these guys that have this dual threat nature, one can give you a stronger floor because you get those rushing yards. They're easy fantasy points, but also gives you the ability to hit a massive spike season if they happen to spike in both categories. When you look at Drake May, looking at our variance logic where we look at floor, median, and ceiling projections for fantasy life, 22.4 is the ceiling for Drake May, even though I only projected him for 208 passing yards per game. The variance logic is handling all the rest. Well, that comes in really close to some guys that we just got through talking about. Bo Nix at 23.8, so really only 1.4 fantasy points behind him. And then if you talk about where we landed with Caleb Williams, he was at 23.4. So I think you could make an argument that this is a situation where Drake May maybe should be right there in that same tier with those guys. I went ahead and kept it one tier lower, Ian, just kind of wanted to see a little bit more passing upside from Drake May before I did that. But again, our variance logic is already saying, hey, sometimes we don't know as much as we think we know. And based on the way things historically have played out, whenever we project these sort of players, there's a really nice range of outcomes, especially when it comes to the ceiling for a guy like Drake May.
One of my favorite, more random stats I've uncovered this offseason so far is that the NFL's leader in yards per carry with a minimum of 50 rush attempts last year. Drum roll, please. Yes, of course, it was somehow Drake May. So Duke can scoot out there, man, and honestly finds himself in a good situation to take advantage of that. Josh McDaniels obviously back in New England, joining forces with Vrabel as the OC. And I understand that last year with the Raiders was a little bit effed up, but year before that, managed to lead a top 12 offense. And Dwain, what really gets me excited is going back to that 2020 season, the Cam Newton COVID year in New England, where McDaniels really, man, arguably did one of his better jobs, I think, as an OC. Didn't have Tom Brady just do everything for him. Utilized a lot of unique rushing concepts with Cam, and despite Cam only throwing 8 touchdowns, only averaging 177 passing yards per game, still got him to finish as QB 17 in fantasy points per game, again, thanks to that rushing upside. So, hand up, no, I'm not saying Drake May is freaking Cam Newton as a rusher, but you look at some of the numbers, man, and if he can be 60% of that, plus a little bit more than that passing bar, which again is not high, we could see something special. So again, good stuff for May. And Dwain, man, really good comp list here. I'm going to end things with this. List of quarterbacks, and this includes Drake May. If you just remove, again, the 2 games where he got in backup duty early on and then the injured one against the Jets, I believe. List of quarterbacks to clear 220 passing yards and 35 rushing yards per game in a single season in Super Bowl era. Cam, Lamar Jackson, Hartitz, Josh Allen, Mike Vick, Dante Culpepper, Randall Cunningham, Kyler Murray, Russell Wilson, RG3, Donovan McNabb, Steve Young, and yes, Drake May himself. So again, quarterbacks like this really don't make a habit of busting in fantasy land. Would be a lot cooler if we had better weapons out there. Stephon Diggs, hopefully he's going to be healthy. We like Kyle Williams, but again, day 2 draft pick. We'll see how that works out. And Dwayne's favorite wide receiver, hater of shoes and soup himself, Mac Hollins, filling out the 3 wide receiver sets. So again, that part is not ideal, but hey, added some serious resources in the offensive line. Obviously with Will Campbell, got an explosive pass catching back in Travion Henderson. I mean, Dwayne, when you are looking at kind of that mid-tier range of quarterbacks, because unlike, Caleb Williams, we're not going to have to pay up too much for Drake May. Right now he's sitting there as the QB 16. You were saying like there's not that Jayden Daniels type of quarterback this year who we can actually expect to get 800 plus rushing yards. And I'm not saying May's going to get that either, but QBs 15 through 20. Dak, Drake May, Jordan Love, Stroud, T-Law, McCarthy. Drake May's got the highest rushing floor of any of them, and I wouldn't be shocked if he puts up some good passing numbers too.
Yeah, I wish they would have done a little bit more like for his receiving core, but technically he checks the same boxes that we talked about for Caleb Williams and Bo Nix earlier, right? The difference is we don't feel as great about his supporting cast, don't feel as great about what he did in year one as a passer compared to a guy like Bo Nix. But I think, and that's why I was saying a second ago, like you could make an argument that Drake May belongs in the same tier with Caleb Williams and Bo Nix, and potentially CJ Stroud is the guy that gets bumped. And again, guys, this is fantasy. And we care so much about what these guys can do on the ground, not just for their floor, because again, if they do manage a spike season in both categories, for example, if Drake May did somehow come out and throw for 4,200 yards and 30 passing touchdowns, rushes for 500, but punches in 6 or 7 scores, man, he's going to be way up there in the fantasy ranks. CJ Stroud just can't do that. His only path to getting there is throwing for like 5,000 yards and 40 touchdowns. And then you're hoping his 150 rushing yards, he punches in 2 or 3 scores, maybe gets some sneaks at the goal line. So there's just a wider way. There's a wider range of possibilities in how Drake May could get to that spike season. So yeah, I'm with you. Drake May is one of the guys, and I've continued to move him up the ranks. Honestly, the more and more I've dug into our variance logic and been testing it, certain players are moving up in my ranks, and Drake May is one of them.
Got the Patriots preview I'm writing here next couple of days. Make sure you check out my team previews going live on fantasylife.com. But I'm with you, man. It's always fun when you start digging in a little bit more and you look at the ranks and it's like, man, I got to adjust these things. What are we doing here? So again, Drake May starting off our tier 3. Right behind him is Cam Ward. Obviously, all due respect, number 1 overall pick. I do think he is poised for big things, but wanted to kind of, we've talked about Cam Ward the entire draft season. I wanted to stick with this, high-end rushing quarterback sentiment and move on to tier 4 because we have 2 QBs here, Anthony Richardson, and yes, Jackson Dart. So looking at Richardson, again, really is a situation, man, where only Jalen Hurts averaged more fantasy points per game from just rushing than him last season. Now the question is, can he beat out Daniel Jones? But then with Jackson Dart, Dwayne, maybe someone who's honestly going underappreciated in terms of what he can bring to the ground, averaged 499 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns per season at Ole Miss. And that was including sacks that unfortunately take away QB rushing yards in college. Please, whoever the hell is going to be the college football commissioner someday, fix that. It is really annoying for us fantasy analysts to deal with this. And Dwayne, the whole world has to revolve around us. So thoughts on Richardson and Dart and maybe what we could see for them in 2025 specifically, how high you're willing to reach on them, because again, don't have the guarantee of starts like we do with these other quarterbacks, but if they get out there, man, this is one of those rare situations where it's a QB you're drafting in the 20s, but the second you can start them, borderline QB1s potentially.
Yeah, I think if it's a dynasty startup, right, and we're just, power ranking these guys over the last 3 classes, this is exactly where they fit. I think the way you think about them from a 2025 roster construction standpoint, if you're thinking about how you want to build out your fantasy teams, because there isn't a clear-cut guy like a Jayden Daniels that we just love that we're targeting, and there are some other names that we've named, but let's say you miss on some of those, Ian, and you're stuck with like a pocket passer. Maybe it's a Jared Goff type, right? And you're fine. You're like, okay, I can start the season with a guy like Jared Goff. He's been pretty good the last 2 seasons, but I still want to have some upside on my roster. I think that Anthony Richardson and Jackson Dart are the kind of guys where if I was going to roster 2 quarterbacks in a league that only makes me draft 1, that's the kind of name I would be going for, right? Or let's say you really get hosed at the quarterback position and they just all go early and you're gobbling up value at other positions and you get stuck with a guy like Matthew Stafford to start you out for the first 4 or 5 games. Not optimal, but I would definitely, in that scenario, I would be drafting one of these 2 players. I would be putting them on my bench as priorities because of what they can do as dual threats. It just gives them this massive ceiling. If we look at Anthony Richardson, Ian, in the games where he played at least 90% the snaps over the last 2 years, he's averaged 46.5 rushing yards per game, 181 passing yards with 0.9 passing touchdowns. I mean, this is a guy that when you look at the range of outcomes, you got to be open to it. I know that he's stunk. I know that he's been bad, but the variance logic is helping us account for that. This is one of the few players, Ian, that like he could still surprise us, even if he's not a good passer, because he is so good as a runner and he could score 23 plus fantasy points per game. You're just not going to find that elsewhere in your draft other than Jackson Dart is the one other guy. And so it's interesting because they're different in the way that Anthony Richardson stock is probably falling, right? And at some point, does the regime just decide, man, we can't have him out here. We just got to try to win some games and save our jobs, versus on the flip side of that, Russell Wilson's probably going to start for the Giants. And does it eventually become, well, we better at least get the young guy out there and show that we can make him look better. And there's a different way of saving your job, right, in New York. So I think that if I'm putting a bet on which one could potentially win me my fantasy league at the end of the year, I kind of feel like it's more Jackson Dart, but they're both a very similar archetype. Obviously, Anthony Richardson has the higher ceiling as a pure rusher, but I think Jackson Dart has got the better combination of, man, maybe he might be a pretty good passer and a pretty good runner, kind of in the vein of some of these other guys we've talked about, like Bo Nix, Caleb Williams, and even Drake May.
Right now, early ADP, Anthony Richardson, QB 27, and Jackson Dart, QB 29. And I get it. There is a chance that neither of these guys even gets a chance to start this year. That could happen. But we're also, it's year 2025, Dwayne, and the competition is Daniel Jones and Russell Wilson. All right? Could be a lot worse here. And I will say, man, when I'm getting into these best ball streets, I have been tagging on Anthony Richardson to some QB needy rosters because, again, you're just not going to see that same level of upside with guys going around that spot. Tyler
Anthony Richardson's ceiling, Ian, real quick, in the variance model is 23.7. Right? That's way up there, guys. Like, now, again, that's his ceiling run out. We're not saying he hits that all the time. That's if things went really well for Anthony Richardson. For Jackson Dart, it's 23.1. So, I mean, he's putting you right in the range of those guys like Kyler Murray, Bo Nix, Caleb Williams that we talked about, slightly below Joe Burrow and definitely below the Jayden Daniels, Josh Allen's, Jalen Hurts, the guys that we've talked about. But these are guys that give you a chance to at least make it close between how many points you're giving up to your opponent who has that other quarterback on their roster and is getting to start them every week.
We'll say, I mean, Richardson, I know a lot of people are just going to say he checked him out of the game. He checked himself out of the game. This guy's not an NFL quarterback. You can go look at some of the lowlights and it's brutal. He showed some nice progression during his final 5 starts of the year. Okay, those 2 fourth quarter drives he had against the Jets, made numerous big time throws downfield, had another nice comeback against the Patriots that featured some clutch plays, when they needed it. And again, that's just throwing the football, so he knows he has what it takes as a rusher. And at a minimum, that is really all we need in fantasy land. So, Dwayne, this time last year, I was drafting a lot of Anthony Richardson. Now, about a half the price, probably even less than that. What could go wrong this time around? But again, those guys are closing out tier 4 of our quarterback. We still want to talk about 2 more, though, here, and that is Michael Penix and Bryce Young closing things out again among our quarterbacks from the last 3 classes. So, Dwayne, let's say you get promoted from, Director of Analytics at Fantasy Life to NFL General Manager. Congrats, my friend. Who would you be entrusting your franchise with between Penix and Young for the future?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to lean to Penix, and I'm not crazy about either one of these. Right, neither one of them do that much running. Bryce Young did start scrambling around a little bit more at the end of last year. We did see him do that some in Alabama, typically to buy time to make the big throw down the field. Panthers haven't necessarily had the weapons, so that once he did scramble out to find someone open to make those big plays, maybe that changes now that we've got Tet McMillan in the fold. But when I watch Michael Penix, for all the holes that he does have in his game, Ian, I do see the big arm that can make all of the throws. And so I do wonder if there's that, at least at a minimum, there's this elite passing quarterback ceiling that we could get for Penix. I feel like at this point, I've seen enough from Bryce Young that I just really feel like he's going to end up being more of a game manager, which might be fine for an NFL team. He could be a guy that come out to throw for 4,000 yards, 23 touchdowns, doesn't throw a lot of picks. You manage the game, you play some good defense, you win 10 or 11 games. He may even win you a playoff game. But when I'm thinking about the raw ceiling, I just lean to Penix. And again, there are question marks. Guys, go back and watch the Penix film. Like, the guy has a cannon and he will fire it in there, but there's also some major misfires. It's not like this was the most accurate quarterback that we're talking about in the league. You can see it here on the screen, a 58% completion rate last year, slightly below Mr. Young at 61%. So I'm not saying that my logic is perfect here, Ian, but I do believe the primary path for both of these guys is as a pocket passer. And I just feel like right now, looking at Penix, he's got more of the raw tools to potentially hit a ceiling. Not guaranteeing it's going to happen, but I do like the fact that he's got the stronger arm. He can fit more windows. And I also have to say, like, to start, I like his weapons better. We're hoping Tet McMillan is good, but we're kind of hoping Tet McMillan can be Drake London. Well, Michael Penix already has Drake London, right? Kyle Pitts, I get it. He's been a bust, but Bijan Robinson has been a nice player out of the backfield. Darnell Mooney, man, talk about an underrated player that nobody even wants to touch in fantasy drafts this year. Like, that's kind of weird. He was really good last year. So I tend to lean to Penix, but very interested in what your thoughts are on this one, because I think it's pretty close.
Small sample size, Dwayne. Michael Penix, Number one in PFF pass grade, number one in big time throw rate, week 8 through 18. Because again, I pulled these stats actually for Bryce Young, because that's when he took over again for his second stint. Came out, actually had, a nice performance against Denver, maybe a little bit of mop up time, but it was the Broncos. Okay. Came out there again, numerous games, Eagles, Chiefs, where he actually did enough against high quality competition to win. Got let down by, his defense and or Xavier League at the end of these games. So I was looking this up for Bryce Young, because Bryce actually had the highest big time throw rate during that stretch. If you go ahead and move that sample size up, also the 8th best PFF passing grade, but those really are the two stats Bryce Young stands. I'm talking about you, Josh Norris. Appreciate you, man. Where you can, if you want to find the most rose-colored story for Bryce Young, big time throw rate and PFF passing grade, because that's where I started to kind of fall off a little bit with Bryce particularly, because still, Dwain, again, we're saying this guy played so much better in the second half of the year. Okay, just complete night and day difference compared to what we saw in a decent, 18 game sample from the previous season into the first 2 weeks of this year. So best version of Bryce Young was 18th out of 36 quarterbacks in the EPA per dropback, 15th in completion percentage over expected, 28th in yards per attempt. I don't love when my quarterback is averaging 6.6 yards per attempt, and that's supposed to be the see, I told you guys he's actually a good player, So I'm with you. We added Ted McMillan. He could be anything. He could be a boat, But guess what? Michael Penix already does have that boat in Drake London. So I'm with you. I would take Penix long term, and I am wondering, May, if we're not giving him enough credit just in terms of what his potential could be to boom. Doesn't run a ton, but we could maybe get that CJ Stroud rookie year, 200 rushing yards, finds his way into the end zone 3 or 4 times. Obviously had the infamous 4.5, 940 or whatever back in his pro day. Could run around a bit more at Indiana before he had that injury. So my last point here would be with Penix. I mean, if we were going to find a team that's just going to be in these constant shootouts because their defense is so bad and their offenses won't just keep on throwing the football, I feel like that could be Penix, man, because Drake London in those 3 games last year had a 17-game pace of 221 targets, all right? They scored 34 against the Giants, had some pick sixes, and then we had back-to-back overtime losses where it was just these, shootouts against Washington and Carolina. So, again, Penix going to have that cap on his ceiling because, again, he's probably not going to run as much as we want him to, but London, Mooney, I guess even Kyle Pitts, maybe these guys are going a bit undervalued right now, man.
No, you have to say even Ray McLeod. I don't think we could even say Kyle Pitts anymore. Which Ray actually, he did a solid job playing the slot wide receiver for them. It's not like it was something that you loved in fantasy. It was kind of a guy you might have thrown in your lineup on a bye week where your 2 best wide receivers were out and you're like, man, I'm going to squint here. And in a PPR, I get 9.5 fantasy points, but still more than what people expected from Ray McLeod. But yes, I do hear you. I do hear on the defense. Now they obviously allocated some resources. Some people kind of question, some of the trades and things they made in the NFL draft to do what they wanted to do as far as adding some, not necessarily beef, but some pass rush up front to the defensive line for the Falcons. So we'll see if they can take a step forward. But last year, yes, we did see a lot of those shootouts. So I'm with you. I feel like we're on the same page here. It's just the ceiling thing with Penix. And I do think the example you gave is the perfect one. What you're hoping for as a ceiling is more of a rookie CJ Stroud kind of season where he comes out and gives you a chance to throw for 4,500 yards, maybe even throws a few more touchdowns than what CJ did that year. Maybe you get in that 26, 27 range, not expecting a ton as a rusher, but might he come away with 150 yards? Like, that's possible. And if he punches in 2 touchdowns, you'd feel pretty good about that.
Love the Ray McLeod shot because as someone who drafted a lot of last round Rondale Moore in the summer, hoping he was going to be that role, just devastating to again see that season-ending injury. And then, to see McLeod do exactly what I was hoping Rondale could do. So really the only thing that made me feel better during the course of those games was some nice, cold, refreshing Bud Light. So let's hear a little bit more about that.
Check out the new whip.
Tight.
Fully custom.
How many Bud Lights can you fit in that puppy?
As many Bud Lights as it takes.
It's a lot of Bud Lights. You have to give me one of those.
All right, now it's time for our top tier tight ends, Ian, from Bud Light. How'd you like that? So we're going to start with Brock Bowers in a tier of his own, Ian. Some people might argue that no other player in fantasy belongs more in a tier of their own than Brock Bowers at the tight end position. Had a 26% target share last year. Where are you falling on Mr. Bowers? Obviously, he's sitting at the top here. But the other question is, in fantasy drafts, like how far are you willing to take? How high are you willing to take him even this season?
He goes in round 2, man, which sounds absolutely bonkers. All right. But this man just earned 153 targets. He just put forward the best rookie tight end season ever. And Dwain, I feel like he left some meat on the bone. Okay. You watch this dude at Georgia and he had the rushing highlights. He's just like a man among boys. I mean, I thought his calling card coming out was just like, this is going to be one of the best yak players at the position. And this stat still floors me. PFF only credited Bowers with 4 total missed tackles forced last season, okay? His teammate Michael Mayer had 5 on like 22 catches. And I'm not even trying to put Bowers down, okay? But my point is, I think that he actually could just be scratching the surface of what he's capable. Obviously came out as such a young prospect. He just turned 22 in December. So Brock Bowers, man, again, it's one of these things where, yeah, you can look at some of the garbage time and okay, we have a new quarterback, a new scheme. Maybe he's not going to be able to clear 150 targets again, but you know, man, maybe he does. Maybe we are just seeing the beginning of what honestly looks like the best tight end that we're going to have over the course of the next decade.
Like, why wouldn't he, though? Like, look, I get it. All the film analysts love Jack Bash. But let's just be honest. Jack Bash was not good in college from a production standpoint, so he's a question mark. Like, I know we were talking about Chip Kelly, loves the power slot, probably going to put Jack Bech there. But, like, I just don't see a reason to think that Brock Bowers isn't going to get 150 targets again. In fact, if we go back last year and look at the games after they got rid of Davante Adams, there's a player that averaged 16.4 fantasy points per game as a tight end. Guys, he's giving you wide receiver 1 production as a tight end at a position where you're rarely going to find other guys that can put up 16 fantasy points. The only guys I would argue right now, and it doesn't make this particular list because Trey McBride was drafted more than 3 years ago, so he's not in the running for this particular tiering the way we're working it today. But Trey McBride is like it, and then it's George Kittle. And George Kittle's getting a little bit older. I think you can make the argument for Kittle with Deebo Samuel gone. We're going to probably have a slow start from Brandon Ayuk this year. We've got questions around Ricky Pearsall, Juwan Jennings, who we really loved last year. But let's be honest, guys. It's not like teams were lining up all over the place to sign Juwan Jennings away from the 49ers. The 49ers were smart enough to keep him. He just had this massive breakout year. But do we really know that Juwan Jennings is this wide receiver that can just sustain what he did last year? So I think George Kittle is the other option. But man, Brock Bowers, after they moved on from Davante Adams, basically you had a wide receiver 1 and you got to play him at tight end.
Really is one of these things where when I'm drafting right now, similar to quarterbacks, as I was talking about earlier, first or last, because when you look at Bowers, you look at Trey McBride, you look at George Kittle, those are the dudes who I can really see breaking the position. And hey, maybe Sam Laporta gets back to balling out. TJ Hawkinson, Jonnu Smith, they aren't bad, but I just think, again, you can draw that line a bit closer to tight ends 4 through 10 to some of the guys like Jake Ferguson and Dallas Goedert going closer to tight end 15. I never can imagine those guys, again, putting up the sort of numbers that we are expecting out of Bowers, McBride, and Kittle. So again, easy guy at the top of our tier here with Brock Bowers being number 1. But now, Dwayne, it is time for everyone's favorite tight end matchmaker game. Start, trade, marry Sam Laporta, Colston Loveland, and Tyler Warren. Who you got?
I'm starting Sam Laporta. And then I'm going to marry Colston Loveland because he graded out higher than Tyler Warren in the rookie supermodel. That means I'm trading Tyler Warren. We've got some concerns there about the quarterback play. Just real quick, though, I wanted to hit on Sam Laporta, Ian. And he was the tight end 2 as a rookie in 2023, averaged 13.8 fantasy points per game. Last year, drafters were investing 3rd and 4th round picks, and Sam Laporta didn't go so well. Think of all the times we had folks writing into us or asking us, hey, how can I continue to stick with Sam Laporta? Do I cut him? What do I do with him? And like, we were asking ourselves the very same questions. But when we look back at it now and kind of get to zoom back out and see everything that played out, I do think injuries played a key role for how the season started last year for Sam Laporta. If you remember, he missed time in training camp with that hamstring. Then he suffered an ankle injury in week 3. Starting in week 12, when he regained that near full-time role and his route participation got back up to where we were used to seeing it, 87%. After that, he went on to average 14 fantasy points per game with an 8.6 utilization score. So really looked much more like what we saw as a rookie versus what we saw early in the year. So my gut says is that really we just had a rough start to the year last year for Sam Laporta due to the injuries. He was much more like his rookie season than what we thought, which makes him the guy that I want to start out of this trio, but definitely interested to see what order you go with here.
We're actually in exact same alignment, Dwayne. Hey, hand up, everyone. We do not share notes with this, all right? I was not cheating off my man, Dwayne, but yes, I am going to go ahead and marry Mr. Colston Loveland, start Sam Laporta, and again, trade Tyler Warren. So also, Dwayne had a shoulder AC joint injury in November, just played through it because my man's a freaking dog out here. But yeah, you mentioned the week 12, got back up into 14 PPR points per game if you include what he did in the divisional round. And if you really want to just, hey, it is the offseason, let's just have some arbitrary, week lines going here. But if you want to go back to week 10, just because 14.2 PPR points per game the rest of the year, that's actually more than he did as a rookie. I mean, when you look at Laporta, Dwayne, you just say, okay, man, he was this big bust. We drafted him to be the tight end 1. He only went ahead and finished as a tight end 9. Wouldn't you think that came because he fell off as a player and stuff? I mean, and yes, to an extent, earning less targets, you could say, okay, he was a lesser player, but his efficiency went up all over the place in terms of yards per catch and yards per target. I don't think Sam Laporta magically turned into a bad player. I mean, I know I just said first or last after those top 3 guys is tough, but at the same time, man, if we get another 110 plus targets from Sam Laporta, who's to say he's not going to go ahead and reclaim his spot at the top?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely in the range of outcomes. I would put Brock Bowers clearly ahead of him. I still think Trey McBride is ahead of him just because we've seen these absolutely astronomical target earning abilities from these players. We talked about it with Bowers, 26% target share last year. It was even higher than that after Devontae Adams left. We've also seen Trey McBride just be this complete target monster. We haven't seen that yet from Laporta. He's been good. He's in that 21 to 22% range, but he plays in this really good offense. If we have to make a bet on which one of these offenses is going to score the most touchdowns, and we know tight ends are often the recipients of those touchdowns, especially on a team like the Lions where you've always got to respect the run. I think Sam Laporta might be the guy we'd have to make the bet on as being the guy that would lead that group in receiving touchdowns. So he does offset some of that loss that he gets as far as a target earner with Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamison Williams and obviously Jahmyr Gibbs out of the backfield, stealing some things, but a high quality offense. We'll see what happens with the loss of Ben Johnson, but I'm betting on the Lions offense just continuing to keep on being good this year, this season.
Post-hype bounce back. Sam Laporta season, man, you sold me.
All right. Yeah. Well, that's been our top tight end tiers presented by Bud Light. All right. Okay, fantasy football fans. Sure, the NFL season may be long over, but next season's action is already well underway. We're talking big trades, new signings, draft order shuffles, you name it. And all this preseason NFL action is easier to enjoy with the official beer of the NFL. So get Bud Light delivered today and enjoy every season projection, every player trade, every coaching change, and draft pick with a clean, crisp taste of Bud Light, the official beer of the NFL. Stock up now for the offseason and enjoy. Bud Light, easy to drink, easy to enjoy.
All right, guys, as we're going through our tight ends, best ones of them, over the past 3 draft classes. Again, tier alone at the top is Mr. Brock Bowers. Tier 2, Sam Laporta, Colston Loveland, and Tyler Warren. 4 remaining tight ends, Dwayne, that we're going to lump into tiers 3 and 4. Dalton Kincaid, Tucker Kraft, and a pair of rookies in Harold Fannin Jr. and Mason Taylor. So I know you have several dynasty squads out there, Dwayne. Hope they're treating you well this offseason. You can only keep one. Kincaid, Kraft, Fannin, or Taylor. I'm going to add the caveat that you don't need them to necessarily, ball out in 2025. So for the long term, which of these 4 would you want?
Oh, man. I think I'm going to go with Tucker Kraft, which is going to surprise people because Tucker Kraft is the guy that I have called out as being the one that, was a bit of a fugazi last year. Not because he's a bad player, but because he didn't really have a high target share. He just came through with massively big plays. But at the same time, when I look at a player like Tucker Kraft, he came through with a lot of big plays. And if I'm a team, I would rather reward him with more of those opportunities. He plays in an offense that I like in Green Bay. This was really close, Ian. I wanted to go with Harold Fannin Jr. so bad. Had Harold Fannin Jr. landed on a team where I felt better about the future of their quarterback position, and he wasn't also playing behind a guy like David Njoku, let's say he had landed with the Jacksonville Jaguars, for example, Harold Fannin. He would have been the name that I would have called out. He had a 100 rating in the rookie supermodel as far as his production rating, the best all time. So he's a guy I wanted to get in on, but man, the landing spot was just enough to scare me off. So Tucker Kraft is the guy. Look, Dalton Kincaid, I'm not completely closing the door on the guy, Ian, but man, when you're a first round pick and you're on a team that is desperately in need of pass catchers that can help really ignite the offense, and they continue to keep you in a part-time role, I just feel like that's telling. I'm not saying it can't happen for Dalton Kincaid at this point, but it feels like we got to kind of be leaning against that.
I was so ready to go to war with you. You were going to talk about Kincaid's targets per route run rate, and I was going to say, yeah, but one target's worth twice as much when it goes to Tucker Kraft. So I'm happy you've seen the light. And just, again, shout out to Kraft for making so much out of not nothing, but just, again, being really a freaking beast after the catch, man. He actually now just only joins Chigozie Okonkwo, still very good at football, and Jonnu Smith as the only tight end since 2018 to average north of 3 yards after the catch above expected per next gen stats. So again, really has made the most out of his opportunities. He's in the Jordan Love, Matt LaFleur ecosystem. Let's throw Tucker Kraft the ball more often and see what happens. So guys, that's going to do it here on this Fantasy Live show. We appreciate you guys tuning in as always. Plenty more goodness coming your way the rest of the summer. In the meantime, make sure you check out all of our goodness over at fantasylife.com. So for Dwayne, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Live show. And until next time, take care, everybody.